and welcome to this month's ITA Clean Sport Education webinar on navigating supplements, reducing your risk of an anti-doping rule violation. My name is Nikki Hamblin. I'm an Olympian and a member of the education team at the ITA. To get the most out of today's webinar, we are offering translation in Arabic, French, Russian, and Spanish. We'll be answering your questions live at the end of the session, and you can write them at any time using the question button on your Zoom menu, and we will be recording the session. I'm pleased to offer our thanks to our official presenting partner, Informed Sport, whose support of these webinars allows us to deliver them to the clean sport community across 5 languages. Informed Sport is a global certification program for supplements that batch test products for substances prohibited in sport. As supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage all athletes and athlete support personnel to check all products before use at sport.wetrustYoutrust.com. Joining me today are Terence O'Rorke and Jeni Pearce. First, I would like to welcome Terence from our presenting partner, Informed Sport. Terence holds commercial responsibility for the company's supplement testing services and certification programs. Prior to joining LGC, the parent company of Informed Sport, Terence worked for the World Anti-Doping Agency in Montreal, where he developed anti-doping expertise and experience that has been crucial in making Informed Sport into the leading supplement certification program that it is today. Terence serves as a vice chair of the European Specialist Sports Nutrition Alliance and advises a range of sports and anti-doping bodies on the use of supplements. In addition to his commercial role, Terence has responsibility for developing partnerships with key organizations in sport and anti-doping. So welcome to the webinar, Terence. Will you just pop your camera on and just give us a brief wave and say hi?
Thank you, Nikki. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone.
Thank you, Terence. Next, I would like to welcome Jeni Pearce. Jeni is a leading sports dietitian and nutritionist. She is a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit for her contributions to sport nutrition, a New Zealand registered dietitian, and she has an IOC diploma in sport nutrition. Jeni has extensive experience in supporting elite athletes and teams globally, including roles with High Performance Sport New Zealand and the English Institute of Sport. And during this, she was involved with supporting athletes attending numerous Olympic and Paralympic Games. Jeni is recognized for her leadership in sports nutrition education, risk management programs, and her governance roles in New Zealand. Welcome to the webinar, Jeni.
Good morning, and it's nice to see everyone.
Thanks, Jeni. Okay, you'll hear a lot from our panelists today and not too much from me, but I will put this webinar into context and offer the introduction. So research indicates that the prevalence of supplement use among athletes can range from 40 to 100%, depending on the sport and level of competition. However, the use of supplements comes with risks, including the potential for an inadvertent anti-doping rule violation. So, to help you navigate potential supplement use, we've invited Jeni and Terence, who, as you have heard in their introductions, are both experts, to provide valuable insights and guidance on this topic for you. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Jeni, to get us talking about supplements.
Thanks, Nikki. Kia ora, everyone. That's hello from New Zealand, and welcome wherever you are and whatever time zone you're in. Thank you to the ITA for organising this important session, and I'm delighted to contribute and share information with you on supplements. Notice the title is safer supplement use, not safe supplement use, as no supplement can ever be guaranteed 100% safe. Supplement use in sports centres on risk management. Over the years, I've had roles in establishing supplement programs at national sporting organisations and institutes, and to help develop their own risk management supplement programs. Next slide. This is what we're going to go through today. We're going to look at how athletes are connected to the WADA anti-doping code, why athletes use supplements, what exactly are supplements, where they fit, what are the risks, some examples of reading product labels, and also the food versus supplement options, and I'll give you some resources. Next slide. So how are you as an athlete or a coach or an athlete support person connected to the World Anti-Doping Code? We're all accountable under the code. And for athletes, it is strict liability. And that means whatever goes into their body, they're responsible for. If an athlete ingests a contaminated supplement and they're able to show that this is unintentional and there is good evidence and there have been good records and samples kept, this may help reduce a sentence. However, ignorance is no excuse, just like your taxes. It's important to remember that coaches and athlete support staff, including physios, S&Cs, nutritionists, all have responsibilities and are all accountable. If you're in a position to give advice, know your responsibilities. If you're not sure, don't do it. So the athlete is accountable. Sorry. Okay, so looking at supplements, here are some key points. Supplements are popular, and not just with athletes. Many people use supplements, including for health, medical, and sports performance. The elite athlete is actually a small proportion of this market, and athletes and celebrities are very popular marketing influencers to encourage the purchase of supplements. And research has shown that supplement use can start as early as 10 years of age. And also one of the interesting things here is that there is data showing that early supplement use is actually linked to higher doping practices for that athlete in the future. Most common sources of information for athletes is actually family, friends, coaches, fellow athletes, and the presence of social media is actually increasing. However, it's interesting because elite athletes indicate that they seek their information from their performance support team members, particularly their dietitians, nutritionists, and their sports medical people. Often, up-and-coming athletes may not have access to this sort of accurate information. Information on supplements is also not always reliable. So people need to check who the advice is coming from and that that person has knowledge both about the athlete needs and also supplement safety. And supplements are $1 billion industry. And in 2019, the market was estimated to be 123 million US, and it was predicted for this to double by 2030. So why do athletes use supplements? There's a difference often between what an athlete believes and what the science actually shows. So on this slide here, I've got some of the reasons an athlete may think they need to take supplements, that they need extra protein, more vitamins and minerals, they need to be taking special foods, that they actually just need more, their needs are greater. They often believe that manufacturers tell the truth, and they think they need to have more than what is considered to be sufficient. More is always better for some athletes. Some may take it as insurance, just in case they could or may be missing something. But also some may believe that food is deficient in nutrients due to the processing, so they need supplements to top it up. They may take them to compensate for a poor diet, and they may think supplements are a quick fix or a shortcut. A lot of athletes believe that they're safe and harmless, and then sometimes there may be a legitimate reason they take them to prevent an illness or to improve performance and recovery. And they also may believe that they should take them because everyone else is using them. And often supplements may be used because it actually is convenient. However, the science shows a different aspect of supplements. There are concerns about getting adequate protein, adequate vitamin and minerals, particularly iron, calcium, and vitamin D in the winter in some countries where the UV light is not as good. That they need adequate antioxidants, they need good recovery, and there are some conditions where zinc and vitamin C may actually support immunity. The key areas for concerns are actually very small. So to correct a deficiency may be a legitimate reason to take a supplement like iron and vitamin D, to increase energy to prevent low energy availability, to get the right carbohydrate intake, and other areas like the timing of carbohydrates and the desirable fluid intakes may also be a case where supplements could legitimately be used. But there are actually very few supplements that implement performance. Next slide, please. So when we look at the food versus supplement versus medicine, this is quite complex. Food is highly regulated. And this is because people need to make sure that their food is safe, it's free from microbes, there are no foreign bodies or allergens, and there are really strict marketing claims. Where for medicines, this is also highly regulated at the other end. However, supplements are not as well regulated, and they're definitely not regulated for banned substances. And some of the regulations can be quite vague. So Terence will go into this a lot more detail, but the important thing to remember is that you can't treat food, medicine, supplements exactly the same. Next slide, please. So many athletes in the general public believe if it's for sale and on the shelves, then it's safe and well regulated. And most countries have regulations around dietary supplements in some form. It's, as I've mentioned, it's not in terms of anti-doping and the presence of prohibited substances for athletes. The perception is that many people treat medicines and supplements as the same. Supplements can only be are often only pulled from the market if there's a presence of a toxic level or there's a well-known unidentified drug or some other form of contamination that's been reported and identified. Toxic metals are a common one for reasons for supplements to be withdrawn from the market, and you may often see food recalls that are present. Medicines require strict rules and regulations, and this concerns efficacy, safety, and purity. However, supplements do not have these the same. They are not regulated to the same. In many countries, supplement manufacturers do not need to prove standards and a product is safe for market. So you need to know what products are safer, and Terence is going to go into this in a lot more detail. If you cannot identify whether a product is okay or if an athlete should take it or not, avoid taking it. Remember, using supplements is risky because they don't require the same level of safety, purity, or efficacy before going to market. Okay. So when we look at the types of supplements, we can split them up into 3 basic groups. And this can be confusing. There's no single definition or specific sports supplement classification. But the 3 categories are your sports foods, and these tend to be the lowest risk, include sports drinks, powders, gels, proteins, and electrolytes. And these also contain ingredients that are often found in food and are usually packaged for convenience. And it also could include protein bars. The next group is the medical and nutritional supplements. These contain often a single ingredient and combinations that are often found in food. And they may be provided to correct a deficiency or treat a specific condition. And I've listed here iron, zinc, calcium, multivits, and probiotics. The performance supplements, sometimes referred to as the ergogenic aids, there are only a few to be found in this category that have really good evidence that actually work and are effective for our athletes. And these include things like creatine, caffeine, your buffers like beta-alanine and sodium bicarbonate, and the nitrates, or the reason that people take beetroot juice. These are all available on food, but the amounts needed would not be practical to eat and to get the same response. These are highly concentrated, and getting the correct dose is essential. And there may be specific times when taking these supplements may actually be of beneficial, but the incorrect use and incorrect timing and incorrect dose could actually lead to an adverse reaction. So the three groups here again are the sports foods, and I've just put examples here, the dietary supplements and the ergogenic aids. Okay, so caution should also be raised for a third group called the herbal supplements. The risk here is with herbal supplements is that they could be contaminated with toxic metals, and there've been a few recalls of this in recent times, usually things like lead and tin. They often are highly concentrated, and they're often not very well regulated. Supplements also come in a wide range of form. They come as pills, capsules, gels, powders, bars, drinks, and ready-to-drink beverages, single nutrients or compounds like a pre-workout. They can come even now as gummies or even sports candy. So it's become a very complicated area. And there is another category called protein fortified foods. It's where your normal food in the supermarket has actually been changed. So it's a very complex and wide area, and I know a lot of athletes get confused about where things fit. So these products can be found from a multiple of sources, from your supermarket to your pharmacy. You can buy these online, or you can get them from a gym or a sports bike shop. And some supplements actually might contain ingredients from 2 or more different categories. Next slide, please. So this is protein fortified foods, and this is where foods from the supermarket have actually been changed by adding a supplement. And sometimes it's very hard to determine whether it's a food, and the lines seem to be very blurred. It's complex, and it's difficult as more and more of these products are appearing on the market. And these are everyday foods that are now suddenly having a sports focus. So examples where an athlete may be at risk here is they could go into a local cafe and buy a smoothie, and the cafe is using their own brand of protein powder that could contain minute amounts of a banned substance. They could go to a fruit store and get a fruit smoothie, and it's had a herbal mixture added to it, such as turmeric or a blend, and it's actually contains a concentrated form of an unintentional banned substance. Hemp is an area to also be very careful with, because it's actually unregulated and untested for the presence of THC, the active compound found in marijuana that can put the athlete over the threshold. However, this is not a concern for the general public because they don't get tested for these things. So it's an added risk for the actual athlete. And an athlete may go to a gym and get a smoothie that's actually got a pre or a post workout out, that it's not been assessed for safety, and it actually contains a brand substance. And a lot of pre-workouts contain beta-alanine and caffeine, which can actually have a double effect and lead to some side effects. Next slide. So where do supplements fit? It's important to remember that they are not the baseline for athletes in terms of their nutrition support. Supplements should not be used to compensate for poor food choices or to substitute for training practices. In the past, I've worked with an athlete whose coach approached me to complete a full nutritional assessment as the athlete was fatiguing and not achieving the expected performance gains. We discovered the athlete was doing less training as he believed the B vitamin energy supplement that he was taking was providing him with the energy, and he did not need to train as much. And this just shows how easy it is, without education and information, to misunderstand the information on labels. Credible performance supplements only provide a 1 to 3% performance gain, and often they don't work for all athletes. So what are the risks? Well, there are multiple. It can be dosing, and this is where a great example here, beta-alanine. If you get the dose wrong, and this actually happened to an athlete that I was working with, and they confused a teaspoon with a tablespoon of powder, and it led to an extreme paresthesia, which is the very painful tingling of your joints, your face, and your toes. Okay, so this is one case where actually more is not better. So getting the dose correct is very important. There are contraindications for taking supplements, such as a pre-existing medical condition. And this is where some medications also may react with some of the supplement ingredients. And there may be times such as pre-surgery where supplements should not be taken. There's also the issue of allergy, intolerance, and sensitivity. And caffeine is a good example here. Because some people are highly sensitive to caffeine, even in small doses. Also, food allergies, such as dairy and lactose intolerance, means that some protein powders from dairy are actually not suitable. And seafood, in some cases, with omega-3 from seafood sources, would not be acceptable if you had a seafood allergy. There may be undeclared ingredients, such as stimulants and steroids, known to lead to health problems, that may be inadvertently contaminated or deliberately added. And Terence will go into that in a lot more detail. There may also be interactions with medications, and some nutrients actually compete with each other. For example, if you're taking a multivitamin and iron or calcium or zinc or magnesium, they all are absorbed at a very similar place in the digestive system and therefore compete. And so you may not be getting the best value out of any supplements that you're taking for such as iron deficiency anemia, or if you needed additional calcium. So you need expert advice to help you with this. There's also issues with incorrect timing and use, so taking it at the wrong time. If you get your sodium bicarbonate intake at the wrong time, it may peak before you actually do your event or long after you've competed. And taking several supplements may have an additional effect of the same ingredient, where actually you're getting very, very high levels. And I'll give you an example of that very shortly. And there are situations where heat, altitude, and the physiological stress of training could increase the risk of an adverse effect, and you may not know about this. Next slide, please. So an example of this is what we call inherent stacking. And this is where several supplements are taken containing the same ingredient. So what we find here is an example of excess intake of zinc, which is actually stored in the body and is actually toxic as it's a metal if it's taken excessively over time. So you could combine a multivitamin with a common immunity supplement. So I've got some examples here. So the recommended dietary intake for zinc is 14 and 8 milligrams for men and women. And here you've already got more than that amount actually been added. Then you add in food on top of that, and the average diet from New Zealand, I've given the values there, so which are actually well within the RDI. You add all those together, and you're well in excess of the upper safe limit, and that's what the UL stands for, all right? And this occurs over time. So consuming this over several months could lead to a rare form of anemia, and it also adversely affects copper metabolism. So it actually suppresses your immune system. So this is a classic example where it's having the absolute opposite effect from the original use that the supplement was thought to be taken for. Next slide. Okay, there are other risks, and I've already mentioned the presence of toxic metals, particularly arsenic and lead, that have come out of the soil. And this is a classic cases of where actually more is definitely not better. So there are cautionary use when it may not be safe for athletes to take a supplement, particularly if there's a family history. And a classic example here would be iron with hemochromatosis, which is a genetic disorder. So people shouldn't be taking iron supplements without a blood test. And it's important to let your support team and your medical teams know if you're taking any supplements, because they may need to stop you from taking these, or there may be good reasons to actually, because of surgery. Sometimes we don't like people taking omega-3 because it increases blood flow. So there might be very good reasons why a surgeon may request that you stop your supplement use. And there may be undesirable side effects, as I've mentioned. So it's really important to have an open discussion with your support teams, and also advise them of any adverse reactions. Please do not share supplements, and please don't actually use somebody else's supplements. You're increasing your risk. Adverse reactions can be anything from headaches to rashes that may occur, and these are not well reported in the current data and literature at the moment. So tingling of the fingers that I've mentioned, we know with beta-alanine is a common side effect, but there may be unknown or unwanted side effects, as I've mentioned, like cardiac symptoms that you might get with caffeine. So if something unusual happens when you're taking a supplement, please report it to your support team. It's very, very important you get support or stop taking the supplement. Next slide. Okay, this is just an example about how labeling can be really confusing. So this is 2 products that are marketed to do exactly the same thing. These are both whey protein supplements, but they look completely different based on the ingredient list. One has 4 ingredients and one has 50 ingredients. So it's very hard to read the labels sometimes and actually understand what's in a product. Some of the marketing can also show where ingredients have been changed or altered, or they're proprietary blends, which make it very difficult. And you can even get cheaper ingredients added into the products. But it's important to try and understand the labels where possible. Next slide. Okay, this is an example where actually a banned substance is actually on the label. All right, so unless you understand, and even for people like me, it's very complicated to actually understand all the different names and analogs of all these ingredients that have been used. But unless you knew, and you can see there in the red circle where these banned stimulants have actually been listed. This is actually an example of methylhexamine, which is banned, often referred to as DMAA or DMBA, and it's actually been listed on the supplement. Now, you may look at that and think, oh, it's got a fancy chemical, but if you were to take this product and you were tested under the anti-doping system, you could potentially return a positive test. All right. The interesting thing about this supplement, it has a similar effect to caffeine as a stimulant. So if you were taking caffeine along with this product, you could actually experience some quite severe cardiac risks. It's been sold under many names, this ingredient, and it's a common source of anti-doping violations from contaminated supplements. And in this case, it's declared on the label, but in many cases, it's not being declared on the label. So this is a really good example. So sometimes the warning's in the name. And if you can just press the button again, and here they are. These all contain contaminated ingredients. So the names to look out for here are thermogenic, ripped, freaked, jacked, hydroxide, crazed, detonate. Okay, so if you want to, if you're looking at these products, you should be suspicious already. So be mindful of the things that you buy over the internet and be very, very careful, because these products are either unintentionally or deliberately contaminated with a banned substance. So if it sounds weird, my advice is don't use it. So we want to focus on a food first, but not always food. So there are some times when supplements could be beneficial. So food is seasonal, it's varied, it gives a range of nutrients, it's very little risk of overdosing. So the times when a supplement could be used is for a clinical reason, and this is where you may have a deficiency, and vitamin D in the winter is a classic example, and also a multivite where an athlete is restricting food to help meet a weight class. Athletes can generally get everything for food, but there are some specific nutrients that are actually challenging. And this would be things like creatine. It is way more convenient to get your creatine in a powder than to have to eat it through meat, all right? And you actually get a better dose and a better quality. Athletes may travel for long periods of time and do lengthy competitions around the world, and therefore a vitamin or mineral may be useful if they can't guarantee the quality or the quantity of nutrients in the food. Protein powders are often more convenient to carry in the gym or in your gym bag, where you can just add water, or where the athlete wants protein and they don't want to add carbohydrate into it. And there are a few performance or ergogenic aids, like the buffers and the nitrates, where it'd be really difficult, or actually impractical, to consume them in their natural state in food. But again, we need to make sure that the dosing and the timing are actually well supported with some good advice. Just a wee word about supplements for the developing athlete. The young athlete shouldn't be having supplements and should be focused on food and learning to work with food. As they move through and increase their nutrition knowledge, and they make sure they get enough good energy availability and carbohydrate and protein, they become more responsible for their food choices, and supplements may only be useful here if there's actually deficiency. Once you get to the elite level, the athlete will be receiving individual nutritional assessment and sports-specific advice. Hopefully they have access to professional and good quality advice, and certain supplements in certain times, well practiced in training, may actually offer the athlete a benefit. So different ages and stages, the different reasons and needs for supplements. Next slide. So I wanted to give you some advice on what to expect from receiving expert advice. So when you're looking for advice from supplements, make sure that there's good communication between the athletes, the coach, the medical practitioners, and the support staff, and they actually understand the wide base for the dosing and individual tolerance, that the training program and medications and travel and training age are well covered, that the current diet is well understood, and there's good evidence for why the supplements have potential benefit, and the dosing and the use is very clear. There should always be a review, and you should make sure that that person who's giving you the advice has nothing to do with a supplement company or comes from a store where supplements are being sold, so they're actually non-biased, and that the person also has good qualifications in sports nutrition. Next slide. And also, supplement sponsorship is a key area I would just like athletes and coaches to be aware of. There's a few reasons why we should be looking at this very carefully. We want to make sure the products are relevant. We want to know how they're marketed. We want to know if there's been any anti-doping violations in the past. We want to know if there's been any product recalls. We want to know if they're batch tested, and Lawrence will help us with that. And then how we can get the right information to actually understand that those are safe. And also carefully look at the true value as an ambassador or the face of the brand versus the time and effort you've put into good training and all that hard work, and whether it's value for money. And the last couple of slides coming up are all about food swaps and things that we can actually do. Next slide. So what I put up here is, people always ask me, Jeni, if I'm not taking a supplement, what can I take? So if you need more protein, milk powder, eggs, yogurt, cheese, and a glass of milk are all really good ways to add extra protein. For vitamin C, add tomato, oranges, mandarins, kiwi fruit, capsicum, and green leafy vegetables. Need more iron? Red meat, mussels, fortified cereals, and good old legumes. More calcium? Throw in some cheese and some yogurt and some mixed nuts. And if you've got canned salmon, eat the bones. Don't pick them out, because that's where the calcium is. And for magnesium, dark green leafy vegetables, seafoods, legumes, lots of nuts and seeds. And the good thing is, a little bit of dark chocolate's good for a little bit of magnesium. And I'm going to leave you with a couple more slides. One is my world famous double up protein smoothie on the next slide. Really easy to put together, really economical, and will save a lot of athletes a lot of money on buying extensive protein powders. So again, sometimes coming back to real food is a really simple, easy, economical, and performance enhancing benefit. Next slide. So you've got to ask yourself, are you willing to take the risk? Are you well informed? Do you know why you're using a supplement? Remember, it's your choice, it's your personal decision, and you're ultimately responsible. And we want you to encourage you to make this decision as wisely as possible. You must keep good records because poor choices do have consequences, and it can be costly in terms of financial and career, and also for you personally. And if you're in a team sport, it could have a direct effect on your entire team. Next slide. So what I've tried to do here is supplement everything I've told you in this very brief 30 minutes. So supplements play a small role, but they never replace training and good food. Athletes are responsible. Most supplements are designed for the general public, not athletes, so be careful. And supplements are not food or a meal replacement, and only a few have a small percentage of performance benefit. Know the risks and adverse reactions. Go for food first, but some safer supplements can have a specific role, but they must be well tested. Get information, look for a registered dietitian or a sports medicine with some expertise, and make sure you know the right dose and timing and testing them. More is not better. Don't share your supplements, report your adverse reactions, keep good records, and most importantly, pay attention at anti-doping seminars and complete the online courses if you've got them, because they matter and they keep you up to date. And what I've done here on the last slide is I put through some resources. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeni. So just as a reminder to everyone, you will get these slides after the session, including the resources slide, which Jeni mentioned. We've put it at the end of the webinar. So now I would like to hand over to Terence, who's going to talk about another key point around supplements, which is batch testing.
Thank you, Nikki, and many thanks, Jeni. It's great to have all that input from expertise and people who know exactly about how to deliver information around diet and supplementation to athletes and elite sports people. Just a little bit of background on what we do at Informed Sport. We are a testing and certification company, so we do not have the expertise that Jeni has in terms of advising athletes on what works in their diet, what supplements they should and should not be taking. We don't enter the debate around efficacy of a supplement. But what we do is we test and we certify supplements for substances banned in sport. So athletes and consumers, if they see that a product is certified on the Informed Sport program, they should then have the confidence to use it, that it has been risk managed to try and eliminate any chance of contamination. So we never enter the debate about what is a good supplement, what is a bad supplement. What we will provide assurance around is that a supplement has been tested and certified for contamination with substances in sport. Now, this approach is often referred to as batch testing, and you hear that a lot across sport and the anti-doping community. And indeed, Jeni mentioned it a few times in her presentation. Sometimes people seem to think that batch testing means that a product is safe or has been certified or has had a very thorough assessment of its manufacturing, and that's not always the case. So I think it's an important place to start is to just try and define what is batch testing. And if we could move to the next slide, please. Very simply, a batch is a quantity of products that has been produced from a single manufacturing event, or a production event, as we also call it. And that batch is designed to be homogeneous. By that, I mean there has been no introduction of other ingredients. The formulation hasn't changed. There hasn't been any changes in flavors or anything like that. And typically, a batch will be denoted by a single batch number, which is mostly found on the back of a product's label. And if we go to the next slide, I'll give you a very simple example of this. This is a protein powder, and as you'll see on the back in the little box, there is the batch number. So it's a very important identifier. Next slide, please. So why are they important? They're important for a number of reasons. Firstly, in terms of inventory management. It allows the manufacturer to manage the whole process of a product's production. It allows the manufacturer also to focus on product safety. If there is ever an issue with a product or a particular batch, having a batch number allows them to identify where the issue happened. And then finally, it's important for product tracking. If there is an issue, they know what product has come from which batch, and they are also then able to, if necessary, do a recall. So batch numbers are very, very important for the manufacturers. And if we go to the next slide, I'll also explain why are they important in terms of anti-doping. Essentially, a batch number allows companies like ourselves, like Inform Sport, to provide effective analysis and then reporting of results. So we will test a batch and then we will deliver an analytical report on that batch. It's only on that batch, it's not on the product. So it helps us to identify and be very clear on what part of the production of a product has been tested. For the athletes themselves, if we can go back one, please. For the athletes themselves, it is also very important because they are able then to check whether the product they are taking is from a batch which has been tested. And this is part of what is called due diligence, which I will explain a little bit later on. And then, obviously, if there is a problem, then they can identify which batch caused that problem, and this will help in any tribunal or investigation into a violation. Next slide, please. But batch testing can also be slightly misleading in terms of certification and anti-doping testing. Just because a batch test has occurred, it does not mean that product is safe to be used continuously. All it says when you do a batch test, all it means is that particular batch has been tested. Now, we know in our company, because we test approximately 25,000 samples a year, that you can test one batch and then the next batch, unfortunately, can be contaminated. And so that's why it's so important not to think that one batch test means all the other batches have been tested. Next slide, please. Athletes also have to be aware that not all testing is the same. If you are to receive information saying that a product has been batch tested, what has it been batch tested for? We know there are some laboratories out there that do maybe 50 banned substances. That's not enough. There's a higher risk of more contamination with different banned substances. So try and be mindful of what testing is actually occurring on the batch. And then secondly, please keep in mind that not all certification programs are the same. I'll be giving details shortly on what we do in Inform Sport to minimize the risk as much as is possible. Other certification programs do not go to that same level. So please keep in mind what you are putting your faith and trust in. Next slide, please. Just want to touch quickly upon some of the things which Jeni also mentioned, and this is what are the risks that are prevalent in terms of the manufacturing of a supplement or a sports nutrition product. At Inform Sport, we've been testing and certifying products for nearly 20 years now, and we've identified three main areas of risk. The first one is from raw materials. So this essentially means that contamination is introduced at the very start of the manufacturing process. Now, there are a lot of products out there which may contain multiple raw materials. And if a raw material that goes into the particular batch has not been tested, the manufacturer will not know that. And so essentially, they are, without due fault of their own, they are introducing contamination to the consumer and to the athlete. We should also keep in mind some of the points that Jeni mentioned with regards to herbal type raw materials. They can be very complex. We call them botanical raw materials, and they can be complex in their structure. And very often they might also contain naturally occurring substances which are prohibited in sport. So again, there is no fault on anybody's behalf. It's just that if you do not have the expertise and if you do not do the testing, you are not sure that the raw material is introducing the contamination. The second cause of contamination is what we call cross-contamination. Many facilities will manufacture, as well as supplements, they will manufacture medicinal goods or pharmaceutical goods, many of which will contain substances which are banned in sport, which is obviously why they exist, because they're providing a medicinal support. We have to test down at very low parts per billion, which is the levels that athletes are tested at. And for a contamination to go from a medicinal or pharmaceutical product into the manufacturing of a supplement is very easy to happen, particularly if that facility does not have in place very good cleaning or segregation processes. So cross-contamination can happen and does happen on a fairly regular basis. The final cause is what we call adulteration, which is like spiking. And Jeni mentioned a product, Jack 3D there, which intentionally carried methylhexamine. There is a market for those type of products. There's a certain type of user that wants to get perhaps a bit of a lift before they go to the gym. They want a bit of a buzz. That's essentially or theoretically is not contamination because they are putting it into the product intentionally, but people have to be very, very mindful of that because obviously there are huge risks. Next slide, please. We also know risk exists because there have been multiple studies over the last 20 years, surveys of products which are available in the marketplace, either through shops or through online, which is obviously the more modern form of retailing. The first survey goes back to the start of the century, and this was the Cologne Lab. They looked at over 600 products. 14.8% came back with undeclared steroids. In 2007, my company, which used to be called HFL Sport, performed a survey in the USA. We looked at 58 supplements. 25 came back with steroids, 11 with stimulants. The following year, we did a similar one in the UK. We looked at 152 products, and more than 10% contained steroids and stimulants. Next slide, please. We continued to do surveys over the next 6 or 7 years. We did one in Europe. Again, the contamination rate was around 10%. We did one down in Australia because there was this perception that products manufactured in Australia could not be contaminated. That certainly was not the case. Contamination can happen anywhere in the world. Everybody follows the same manufacturing process. In that case, we found 19% contained substances banned in sport. And then the final survey we did, which we did in collaboration with the Dutch anti-doping, we looked at what we call edgy products, the risky products that were available in the marketplace. And a remarkable 38% came back with steroids and or stimulants. So the evidence exists. Contamination does happen. All of these surveys were primarily conducted on products which were not part of a certification program, but that is part of our challenge to make sure that athletes and consumers, if they are going to use a product, make sure it's on a program like Informed Sport. Next slide, please. Risk also exists because of the nature of the industry, the size of the industry and the marketing, the very, very effective marketing machine behind it. And again, Jeni mentioned this during her slides. It's a large industry. It's growing on a year-by-year basis. Many of the markets which perhaps were undeveloped 5 or 6 years ago, whether it be in China or in India, are now becoming major mature markets for this industry. The voice of people like Jeni and myself is very small compared to the size of this industry and the marketing machine behind it. And they very often will use high-profile athletes or high-profile celebrities, as we can see from the pictures here, or sometimes they will use sports teams to try and endorse their products to help in terms of marketing, sponsorship, etc. It's very, very important not to be fooled by this marketing. It doesn't mean that the products are bad. Many of the products might also be on Informed Sport and similar programs. But please don't think that just because there's a high marketing drive and campaign behind a product that it is necessarily tested, made to high standards and free of contamination. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, the message out there for athletes can be mixed. It's not a consistent message. The advice is inconsistent. There's a lack of harmonized approach. And this is why I very much applaud the ITA for their webinar today, because they're trying to create more of a harmonized approach across the many different regions. Unfortunately, some sports will advise athletes not to use supplements full stop. Others will say, okay, you can use it, but only if it's on the program. Some sports will say you can't use a supplement, and yet they will then have a big commercial deal with that supplement company. So there's a massive lack of clarity out there, and I think athletes must be aware of that and must make decisions based on having very good advice, such as what Jeni has delivered. Next slide, please. It's very important also for athletes to know a little bit about the World Anti-Doping Code. As I'm sure many of our listeners today know, the code is essentially the rule book for anti-doping across the world. It is underpinned by the principle of strict liability. So whatever an athlete puts in their body, he or she is responsible for the outcomes of that. Next slide, please. But the latest version of the code also recognizes that contamination is a risk for athletes. It should be pointed out here, it's not just contamination with supplements, it's contamination with meat or food products, other types of food products. It can also be contamination with medicines, which contain substances which are not supposed to be in there as well. So there is flexibility under the code, and it says essentially that if an athlete can show that there's no significant fault or negligence on their behalf, then while they will have committed a violation due to the principle of strict liability, they can have their sanction or their punishment reduced from 4 years down to 2 years, from 2 years down to 18 months. And then if they have done excellent due diligence and can show this to a tribunal, they may even have just a warning for their sanction. It's almost like an insurance policy for athletes, and they must be aware of the protection that they have under the code when they are deciding whether or not to use a supplement. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned due diligence, and this is a vitally important thing for athletes. Elite athletes who are facing doping controls must have done their due diligence if they decide to use a supplement. Only use products if they're on programs such as Informed Sport, which will provide a level of assurance that the product is made to high standards and also that the product has been tested for banned substances. In the case of Informed Sport, we test every single batch. Make sure that batch has been tested. And I'll show you in later slides how you can do that. Make sure that you can have access to the product and sample of that batch again, just in case there was a problem with it. And keep a record of all the products you use. Either take screen grabs or use your mobile phone to take pictures of it, because you will be required to submit that on your doping control form, similarly to how you would do if you were using a cough mixture or a nasal spray, etc. Next slide, please. So Informed Sport essentially was created to minimize risk and to protect athletes who wish to use supplements. And we do this by, there's two key pillars to it, essentially. First of all, we will not certify a product unless it has undergone a very rigorous assessment of its manufacturing. We look at all aspects of the manufacturing, from the ingredients, the formulation, what processes they have in place within the manufacturer. And the second component is that we must test every batch pre-release to market. By doing that, we can guarantee as much as possible that there's no inventory from any batches available to be purchased that have not tested negative, and that thereby provides the highest levels of protection to an athlete. Next slide, please. So it's all about minimizing risk, and you might remember Jeni mentioned this in her slides. It is risk management. There are no 100% guarantees, but we believe in what we're doing. We've been doing the Informed Sport program since 2008, and not one of our products yet has been the cause of a doping violation. So we're minimizing the risk, and we think we're doing a very good job at that. As I mentioned, we have to do an assessment of the manufacturing. This is during the certification process. We look at the product, we look at the ingredients, the formulation, what raw materials are going in it, where are those raw materials coming from, what are the standard operating procedures within the facility, have they got in place segregation if needed, have they got traceability processes, etc. Do they have a food safety audit? Are they following all of the GMP verification practices? We will also test the product up to 5 times just to make sure we have a testing history, to make sure that there are no red flags within the manufacturing of that product. Once it is certified, we will then allow that product to carry the Informed Sport logo, and we will list it on our website. So athletes and consumers can then go to the website to check that the product's certified and is being tested. Next slide, please. And once the product is on the program, we make sure that we receive 2 sealed samples from every batch that is manufactured. We test one of the samples for, I think it's 285 banned substances at the moment. And that batch cannot go to market until the manufacturer has received a negative report. We will then store the other sample they send us. We will store it for the duration of the shelf life of that product. So if ever anything was to go wrong, if that product was responsible for a doping violation, the athlete can come back to us. They can then say, can we test the other sample just to try and get confirmation, which will support their cause and essentially make sure they know where the violation happened. We will also continue to monitor the product. We'll do regular reviews, and we will communicate regularly with the manufacturer if there are any changes that occur in the process. So we go to the highest degree of minimizing risk. We make no excuses for it. We have a lot of brands that come to us and say, you're asking too much. And essentially we just say, well, the only way you can protect athletes is by following these processes. We currently have about 1,800 unique products on the program, and we're dealing with, I think it's about 350 brands in more than 30 countries across the world. So the certified products on Informed Sport are available to athletes and consumers worldwide. And essentially, we think what we're doing is very good for the athlete protection. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, we will list products and brands on the website. We also have an app. So if an athlete or a consumer wishes to check whether a product's certified and that the particular batch has been tested, they can go to the Informed Sport website or app to do that. They can search by brand. If we can go to the next slide, please. We have a very simple brand function on the website, so they can search by brand or they can search by product type. And each product is then given a dedicated product page. And on that product page, there are details about the product. There are photographs, so the athlete can make a visual cross-reference. All the tested batches are listed, so they can cross-reference from the batch they are using to the batch which is listed on the website. They can keep the records, as I mentioned before, screen grabs, photographs, and that record will then be like an insurance policy for them. It's part of what we call due diligence. And athletes must get this very clear in their minds. They must perform due diligence. Without performing due diligence, they are not protected as much as they can be under the World Anti-Doping Code. And we're delighted to say that Informed Sport allows that due diligence to happen. And I think that might be the last slide, or is there one more after this?
I think that one might be
the last one.
Terence, yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Nikki, I'll hand over. Sorry if
Great.
that went on a few minutes too long.
No, thank you, Terence. Very interesting, both from you and Jeni, with lots of advice shared. On our next slide, we have collated the resources. Jeni referred to this earlier, but you will, of course, get the slides after the session so you can take a look at these. We do just have a couple of minutes left, so I would like to address a couple of questions in the next few minutes. So maybe the first one, Jeni, I might direct you away. It's from Mohammed, and they have asked, what is the best way to calculate an appropriate dosage of a supplement, considering factors such as body weight, age, gender, and nutritional needs? Are any general guidelines or specific formulas? I'll leave it to you to answer, but maybe it's directing to some resources.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing question. I think the one thing I will say is that the labels on the back of supplement cartons aren't designed for individual use. They're designed to be pretty generic, and then are normally male doses. So if you're a lighter weight athlete and a female, you need to be very careful about the doses that are on a lot of those products. But I would suggest go and see a sports dietitian or a sports medic and get some professional advice, because it can be very tricky. And often, again, more is not necessarily better. So just be careful.
Thanks, Jeni. And maybe one more from Glenda. Are BCAA supplements safe? So first of all, I'm not sure what a BCAA supplement is. So maybe, Jeni, you could speak to that. And then, yeah.
Yeah, sure. That stands for branch chain amino acids, and that's a specific group of amino acids. So my suggestion there was listen to what Terence has had to say, because they need to be batch tested to make sure they're actually safe. You can get them naturally from food, from a lot of animal proteins in particular, and combining part proteins. But a lot of some athletes do like to use them individually. If you're going to use them as a supplement, make sure they're Informed Sport batch tested.
Thanks, Jeni. And maybe a last one from Paolo. Maybe I'll direct this to you, Terence. And they say, so shouldn't we just ban all supplements except the ones used for medical issues like asthma? So I don't know if you have any comment on that, but I presume it speaks to the size of the supplement industry and that they are for general public uses as well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't think you can ban supplements. It's a free world. People have a choice to use whatever they want. Obviously, they have to take the type of advice that Jeni has been given in this presentation, and I'm sure throughout her career. The bottom line is there are some athletes who will take supplements, and we've seen studies, and you mentioned it yourself, Nikki, that many elite athletes these days will use supplements. So you have two choices. You either say, don't take supplements, and they ignore that advice, as they have done for the last 10 or 15 years, or you say, okay, if you are going to take supplements, follow these steps so that you make them safe. And this is what we've been doing on Informed Sport for the last 15 years. Unfortunately, you cannot ban supplements because they do have some benefits, and there's also freedom of choice, and athletes would just ignore that. So my realization has been over the last 10 years is to not put your head in the sand, is to try and protect athletes, advise them in the best way of how they protect themselves, because it is going to happen no matter what experts like myself or Jeni say. Athletes are using supplements. The benefits, or the perceived benefits behind them, are far greater than any advice we can give.
Great. Thank you so much. So we are very much out of time. So that does conclude today's webinar. So maybe just to summarize our session. So supplements do pose a risk for athletes. If you are an athlete that makes an informed decision to use them, please ensure you do your due diligence and follow the advice shared by Jeni and Terence today to protect yourself as much as possible. And as a reminder, anti-doping is based on the principle of strict liability, which means you are ultimately responsible for everything you take and use. So a big thank you to Jeni and Terence and you, our audience. We hope that you did find this session valuable and has supported you to better navigate supplements to reduce your risk of an anti-doping rule violation. So I am aware that we still have lots of questions in the Q&A, so you can always email us at education@ita.sport and we will get back to you. Before we do sign off, just to let you know what is coming up next month, we will look at what you need to know for 2025, including updates to the prohibited list, and you can sign up via the QR code. So that just leaves me to say thank you once again. Thank you, Jeni. Thank you, Terence. And we'll see you all soon. And please have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Nikki. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.